I guess we should give it a few more minutes, but I don't know.
Yeah, I
Maybe-
think Emily said she's having internet issues, but Terrence and Ben, I believe, are supposed to be here.
And Steven as well usually is.
No,
So I don't know.
yeah, Steven's gonna miss for sure.
Okay.
Let me see if anybody else is coming.
Sparse crowd today.
Well, if anybody's curious, I just opened up new RFC for inline build packs. We probably won't discuss it today, but let me find the link.
I think Ben says he's never making these anymore.
Thursday,
Steven's not coming. Yeah, he said that last week. And then Emily doesn't have internet. And Steven can't come.
What about Javier?
He hasn't said anything with regard to that I know of, but were we going to talk more on pack image pull policy from yesterday?
Yeah, that's what I thought. I think pull policy and the lifecycle arguments. I mean, I put the pack register build pack on there just to nudge people, but I don't think there's anything to talk about.
There's also potentially, well, I guess Ben's not here, but the rewrite platform volume out, I think is worth talking about as well.
All right, well, let's do, are there any new faces? Anybody new to the call that like to introduce themselves?
Should we make Emily introduce herself since she just joined?
Sorry.
Do you know Javier's coming, Emily, by chance?
I do not know the answer to that question.
I've been to a few of these meetings, but I don't know if I've ever formally introduced myself. Kenny, I'm a engineer on the Buildpacks release engineering team at VMware. So, hey.
Cool. Welcome.
So is that like the Paketo folks?
Yeah. We don't do we work with the feature engineering team to get those, we handle all the dependencies on the stack side of things on the Paketo front.
So is that like CF Linux 3 stuff?
Yeah, it's like the FS3, which is like the full stack, and then we handle like the base Bionic stacks as well. And we're working on moving towards doing like the UBI images as well.
Cool. Do we want to talk about, what do we want to talk about first?
Should we just do your register build pack? Is that quick?
I mean, yeah, mostly it's for, I think, Steven. And, well, I guess you haven't voted on it. And then I kind of wanted to make sure Javier was +1 on it, since he put a lot of work into it too. Yeah. I think I addressed everything except one minor thing from the discussion yesterday. I'm going to call him the PR now.
What did you decide for? I guess I haven't looked. I guess error messaging back for validation on the issue.
Yeah, comment on the issue and close the issue.
Okay. Cool. Sounds good to me. Did you want to talk about launcher RFC since Emily's here? Or we could do read write volume mount since Ben is not here?
Yeah, we can talk about lifecycle args. I thought we were getting somewhere, Emily, but then Steven ruined it.
I have to say, I still like what was proposed in the original RFC better. Like if it can't get through, then I'm willing to discuss compromises.
The original RFC being your RFC and not Ben's RFC?
I should
Or
say
Ben's RFC?
the RFC.
Okay. So the great Emily rewrite of 2020.
You know, when Steven says less compliant, like normal, I guess normal I get, but less compliant, I'm not sure I get. I mean, like it's pretty common to run, like I feel like Docker run bash, Docker run image bash is pretty normal. So I don't understand
There's a thing I was talking to Emily about this yesterday, and we were looking at the OCI image spec. I think there's a line or entry point that it's the default command that you want to run for an image. And so generally for an app that will be, so instead of like putting in the command, I guess like the general practice is that you will put like whatever Java command as the entry point at that point.
Sure, but in practice, it's usually been SH, right? And what we're saying, we're not putting Java in there. We're putting launcher, which I feel is a replacement for bin SH. So I actually feel like the thing to be compliant to do is to actually pass the process type.
Args the launcher? The args the launcher is what you're saying?
I feel like I disagree that it's normal for the entry point to be bin SH. Like when you pull and Docker run an image from Docker Hub, if you're trying to run an application, usually the application is in the entry point. Otherwise, it wouldn't start unless you knew exactly what command to invoke to run it, right?
It's mixed, yeah.
Well, people could set it as command as well, right?
Yeah, that's
like I feel
true.
like that's actually the more common thing that I've seen, but I definitely have like a more narrow worldview.
I
I guess I've seen both, and I also see the great Google, like, I feel like one of the first things when you go for entry point, like one of the first autocompletes in Google is entry point versus command. Because I think a lot of people generally don't understand, if you aren't like predisposed to it already, like you don't understand the difference between the two things.
Yep.
Like I think Steven brought this up, but in Kate's, when you're setting the command on your container, they actually call it args to make it more clear that that is its intention, right?
Yeah, it's super annoying because it's like, it's just a total mismatch with Docker. But even so, I'm still like, I think what I'm arguing is that the process type should be an argument to the launcher. Like, I don't see why we would omit that. Or I guess I wouldn't go that far. I would say I don't see why providing it as an argument makes us out of compliance in any way.
I think people, when they're thinking about their CMB images, CMB built images, want to think about the entry point as being their application rather than having to think about the launcher, right? And then if args just get added as args to that process, then people can just think about their process without having to think about the unique features of a CNB image.
But don't you already have to break that model the moment you don't do web?
Yes.
Like you now have to like muck around with the environment variables. So I feel like that like paradigm perfect world breaks down fairly quickly if you actually have multiple process types.
Right.
What it has going for it though is that the default when you do nothing is normal and it is what you expect. And then when you want to do other things, like not every image has the concept of a process type, right? So I think it makes sense you have to do something custom for that, but the default is what you would expect.
But the default is to pass nothing. Default is empty args in my, like the 80% case is nothing passed to anything. In which case it's still compliant, right? Or compliant. Yeah, I agree. I feel like most of what I see is I'm building an image that I run in a few different ways for web or for worker or for whatever. And as soon as you have more than just the default, that becomes kind of a leaky abstraction. Because if you try to override entry point, you're in real trouble.
So
I think one of the things to keep in mind, sorry.
Go ahead, Javier.
I was going to say, I think this is very, I guess important into the direction that we want to go in general. Because if you're thinking about Buildpacks from, I guess taking care of the building process only, or, as kind of its primary focus, then your expectation is that it produces an image that then is just the application, right? So that's kind of like one direction. Whereas now if we make these process types more prominent, which might be the right thing to do, right? It's no longer just the build process. It's like the build process creates this image, which is now a special image, right? Like you can't reproduce this functionality without Buildpacks easily, right? Versus if the output is the same.
But that's the truth, right?
Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay. So like if we want to make it more prominent and say like process types are part of cloud native Buildpacks, right? And we make it more focused in that direction. Cause like right now we don't have that documentation. So I feel it's like a hidden feature almost that these process types exist. But if we want to say like, no, like these process types are like first class citizens and you have to understand how they work. And you have to understand that when you use Buildpacks, we are not talking in process types. So we're not talking about an app image, like a naked app image, like you would get from Docker file.
Yeah, I mean, there was that question in general just today, right? Asking like, how do I change the process thing? Like, why isn't this documented? I had to find it on Savant's blog to figure out that information. Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is true. I think the moment you have launcher, right? Like you're ready. It ready is not just build, right? Like we're building stuff in profile and like, you can't just have you can't like have naked bash and have it work. Like, I think that is already true. Like you're saying, Javier.
I think when the default behavior is accepting additional arguments, it does behave the same way a normal naked image would, right? And then when you want to use, that's why I like if you want to use a feature that isn't a normal feature, like process types, pushing that into the custom usage, like a CMB specific property, rather than making that the default interpretation of the normal container usage.
What is so like, if I am doing the process type thing in non-CMB land, what does that look like? Do I produce one image? Do I produce two images?
Provide you could provide just one image.
Like,
right?
what is the
And
compliant thing that people consider the standard on how you do this? I know you can do both for sure.
yeah,
Yeah, what do people do in practice? That's what you're asking, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What
People
is
want to run
considered
different
idiomatic?
commands in the same container.
And
I
to
think
do that, you basically would override entry point.
if you wanted to run like a totally different thing, yes.
yeah.
I think on Heroku containers, I think we just use command, if I'm not mistaken. Like we basically assume entry point is shell and just run command.
Yeah, and I mean, I know I've proposed the third option, right, which does add complexity, and it's really more or less meant to be, something that's configurable versus something that we provide like a standard around. And that third option is that the process type details from a build packs perspective, whether or not it should accept, arguments as you normally would. And the reason why I like that is because then we're not necessarily forcing anybody to go one way or the other, and more or less opening it to the build pack's discretion at that point, right? But I do understand that it has its own set of drawbacks and complexity.
I worry about that because then different images will behave differently in a way that I think teaching users any of these paradigms is easier than having them have to figure out which paradigm they're in before they use it.
Well, I mean,
So-
that's the reality of Docker right now, right? Or with OCI in general. Like I have that liberty, right? Especially for like the pack image where I don't want to have to specify pack again. I just want to take the arguments into this image. I don't see the need to do that. And so having that ability to do so in a Docker file, like that's a choice that as part of authoring this image, we would make. So I think this world already exists, and people, I feel like understand it well enough. They might not understand entry point and CMD when they have to actually like build it themselves, maybe. But if they say like, hey, there's this image and you pass in additional arguments, right? I think that's a lot easier to understand from a user's perspective.
So on Kubernetes, as soon as they set command to Java, they're screwed, right? Is that true for a CMD built image? If they think they're going to override the process and they change command, they will bypass the launcher. Is that correct?
You mean today or in the proposal?
Regardless, I don't think that's
Oh,
just
you mean like a Docker command, right?
I mean Kubernetes command,
Kubernetes.
which is Docker file or Docker OCI image entry point. Like
So
I
it's
think
overriding the entry point, is what you're saying.
right, and that
Okay.
like that to me is the thing. Like we're not even talking about that, but that's actually the biggest sort of user experience danger, and we can't fix that. That's just the way it is. But it kind of signals to me that we shouldn't try to make launcher an abstraction that just disappears. Like we have to be a little bit more explicit, and I think document how processes work. And I think launcher has to be the command, and therefore the process type in my mind should be an argument to that command. So like I get the point about compliance. I actually think what I'm arguing for is the compliant version.
And just for context as well, if that launcher is overridden, what is the behavior then? Does the command just fail, or what?
It would likely fail. You won't have your path and load path and everything set up. So like if you do Java, it probably won't be able to find the Java command.
Unless it's on
Gotcha.
the stack image or something.
Yeah.
Right.
but-
It could be really unexpected. Yeah, it could fall back to something else that's on the image.
But yeah, I mean, basically none of the stuff that the build packs are setting for like profile D or environment that like where things go in layers will be on the path, or any of the environment will be set up. So you'll just get like a bare naked Docker image that happens to have the files on disk, but none of your environment is set up for it.
Gotcha, that makes sense.
like, this may be a dumb question, but why do we even use entry point? Like, if we moved everything to command, obviously you would still have to know that running, if you wanted a bash with stuff from, launcher, you'd have to run launcher explicitly, but it, sort of matches the K8s thing. Like, instead of doing an entry point and a command, we could just do a command and no entry point, or leave entry point alone. And yeah, would that help things?
I mean, I think the goal was to make it disappear. Like putting launcher explicitly on the command, the Docker command nobody would have known that. You'd have to go look it up. And so
But
it
would you
created
need to know it? It's a naked image most of the time, right? Like if we're talking about deploying an image, it's already baked in. You can Docker inspect it and you'd see the command. Like, I don't know. Seems.
Oh, you're saying set it on. I see what you're saying. It would
Yeah,
be
so it'd be /cmd/launcher web or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really liked the way it is now. So maybe I'm biased, but I think that actually is a pretty good experience where you can just Docker run image bash. I don't know. I demo that a lot. It's a good way to like show people that it's just a Docker image.
Yeah, I mean, to Emily's kind of RC though, like it is uglier, but it's not like that function goes away completely. It's just ugly, right?
Yeah, sure. I did, I was looking through conversations with people and some notes and stuff. I've definitely been asked about this from enough people, primarily from Google, that the argument thing in general, that like, I know I think yesterday I was like, it might be just like a Paquito thing that you really need it, but I just feel more and more like we do need to address it.
We could do something really crazy. We could make a bunch of symlinks named after every process type to the launcher, make it a multi-call, and then your entry point is the process type and the args are the args.
That doesn't solve the bash case though, right?
Does though, right? Like if you put those processes in front, right? Resolving.
Yeah,
Do
because you
bash in that case, you'd probably want to set.
You'd get bash, but it wouldn't be launcher bash, right? Unless you created a process type for it.
Right.
Yeah, or you set the entry point back to the vanilla launcher, in which case it could just run bash.
It's not a bad idea.
Yeah, like because I will say it is a bit unexpected when bash suddenly has all the like build pack, pathing set up, right? It's not because it wasn't defined by build pack. It's not bad. It's just at first when you don't realize the entry point is launcher, you're like, oh, how are these here? But then if you end up running without an entry point, they're not there, and that's sort of when you start learning that there is an entry point of launcher. So,
but it's probably what you want though, right? For the most part.
maybe, but you could also set up a launcher as like, if launcher is itself a thing, you could do like, instead of just bash, you could do launcher bash, right? And then they would be, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so you're saying just make it more pronounced that this is a tool, that launcher is a tool versus this entry point where magic happens, essentially. And then that magic adds complexity and confusion.
If you override entry point on a CMP built image and just go back to bash, what will the environment be in profile? That would just be the
whatever like is set in the run image, right?
Could the lifecycle at export calculate what it would do at launcher? So if you override it, you'd get the same environment if you just went through.
Well, there's no lifecycle that runs, right? At that point, that's where lifecycle runs as part of launcher.
I think you're saying, Matt, are you saying dump like a dot profile in the home directory as the last step of the build, sort of?
Yeah, just make it so if you do skip the entry point, or you do skip the launcher, you still get an environment that somewhat resembles what you'd get if it was a launcher given bash.
I feel like for the static environment variables that could work, because you actually could put them in the environment of the image. It's the profile scripts that start to matter, because some of them want to run like at runtimes. They know things like calculate memory and then set environment variables that are then used by something else downstream. Right?
But can't you could source in theory, but it depends on shell. So like you'd have to know if you're running in bash, I guess.
Well, I don't know where we source it. If the launcher doesn't source it, who sources it, right?
Well, just like if you would source it in like if you have a default profile thing that like bash whatever loads when it loads in, like if you're not loading launcher, it loads the script, and then that script essentially would do the profile D tree walking for you.
So that would be true. Sorry, that would be true only if there was one process type, right? But given that these could technically vary, I think we have another RFC that gives you profile D per process type and also environment variables. There is no like single environment anymore.
We have a direct true-false problem. Like some of these images don't have bash on them, right? So we can't just start doing this by default until we know what process we're running, which involves a launcher.
Yeah, it's actually the launcher being the default entry point is actually what drove the process-specific envar types for me, because I didn't want things that were being put there for like web in my bash.
If you did a bash profile setup, couldn't you only do that if the web profile, what would have been provided by the default web profile?
Yeah, would it be web or just anything that's not specific, process specific, I guess, right?
That's also another good point, yeah.
I'm trying to understand what this is trying to solve. Is it trying to solve the fact that you could entry point directly into bash or remove the entry point?
Yeah, basically, I assume it's if you weren't launching a launcher by default, and you basically left entry point to default. When you ran a thing, could you still get the environment that you wanted?
It seems like a slightly different conversation than trying to resolve the arguments and how we pass those arguments into what actually gets executed.
I do kind of like the symlink approach though. Like I do kind of like the idea of defaulting entry point again and then just actually creating, processes. I think you could also potentially add those to the default path when you build the image, so that when you actually bash in, you could just type web and it would just launch web in theory, right? With the launcher without you having to understand that you have to do CND lifecycle launcher web, right?
Yeah, that does sound good.
I wonder also, so in that case, if you create a bash shell, you're not going to get your launcher environment, right? Unless you create a bash symlink. But I don't really want to do that in my build packs. I feel like that feels a little bit like an abomination. But I don't feel strongly that I need that. Like I think to Jesse's point, you actually kind of expect to come into this like naked image with none of that stuff set up. So what you'd need instead is like to be able to run web or some like convenient way to load all of that, like running launcher and make that discoverable.
Yeah, exactly. Make launcher discoverable would be my thing there.
I feel like this way we could give you both pretty easily. Like if you clear the entry point and run bash, you get a naked bash. And if you set launcher in the entry point as launcher and not as a process type, you get the launch environment for your bash.
Yeah, and if people set bash as entry point, they're definitely not expecting any magic to happen.
Yeah.
Cool. So if we think about the solution, and I'm thinking about, our pack image, are we saying that, no, I would still have to specify the process, right? Like there's no way around that. Or can I set my entry point to be the pack web process?
can set a default process. We can set the entry point to be the symlink that has the default process in it. So you set the entry point to pack, and then it just does what you want. But if you want to switch to another process, you say entry point equals task, and then run that with args.
Is that crazy?
I mean, it gives me what I want.
It's a little wacky when you think about how it's working, but I think in practice it might go fairly smoothly.
Like
Other
most
regulations
abstractions are a little wacky.
around like launch toml argument or process names, do those even match like actual process names? Like, or is that going to be a problem? Like,
I think
creating files for this?
we force stuff to be things that can be written to disk or something. Isn't that true?
I don't know if that's true or not.
I feel like I
That
saw
could be
someone with a
added here.
space in one before, and it just worked, but I don't know.
You can use you can escape code that, right?
So slightly related, but so if we have the Java, right, the Java process type, and then the Java binary, which one takes precedence? Are we saying process types always take precedence there?
Yeah, I would think it would make the most sense.
If you want the Java binary, then you set the entry point to be vanilla launcher, and then you pass it Java.
One kind of cool side effect about having these actual files that are potentially pathed by like the default, if we could put them in the default environment, then you could technically reference launch processes built by other build packs, right? Like you'd be able
Yep.
to say, which is something I think we submitted a while back. That was sort
Yeah,
of
I
like,
know something me and you kind of hacked around on, yeah. Cool. Yeah, I definitely like that. I think that'd be awesome. It gives us the flexibility, and hopefully there's not too many drawbacks that we could think of. I would be interested to see like a POC, Emily. I think you were kind of maybe working on something for something else, and
I have a working POC for the RFC as it currently stands, but I could make a different POC for this instead. If it'll make everyone feel good to try it out.
I want to make sure it feels good. Yeah.
I guess like, what is your gut feeling on your own new proposal, Emily?
I kind of like it, but it was my idea, so.
Well, I mean, you have to compete with your other idea, so it's like warring with your own self.
I think I actually like it better because you can use entry point intuitively without needing the like CMB process type environment variable, which is like a little annoying to type out in something that you can only learn about through documentation. This would kind of just work.
Does that also require platform potential change of setting, like a directory and path or something?
I think the
Like
exporter
expectation.
can handle making these things available on the path of the final image.
Okay, so the exporter will take care of it versus the run image. What does it mean for kind of the Buildpack API changes on that side? Because I know like part of the proposal was not just dealing with it at the command line, but also the fact that like as it currently stands, the Buildpack API, you were unhappy with how articles were being handled.
Yeah.
Mistaken.
I think these two things are independently variable to me. I think we should fix how arguments are handled in direct false processes, regardless of how we interpret arguments to the launcher. And I still want to do that. I think the way it's written right now, there's probably one more limitation that needs to be there that Joe pointed out to me earlier today. Like, I think we can still let people have multiple things embedded in a command instead of like a single token, and then we can still correctly tokenize and parse arguments that we stick on the end of that. And I feel like all that should be backwards compatible and fine and more intuitive than what we have now.
I know there were some concerns about the size of launcher in the past. If during the build we're talking about creating these processes, could we create one that does all the like, the profile D stuff that needs to happen and actually like spit out a file and not have the launcher for direct equals true? Is that something? So you wouldn't have to ship the launcher potentially in the run image.
It's an interesting idea that I would need to think about more.
Do you not like shipping launcher, Jesse?
Oh, I have no opinion on the matter. I remember seeing it before.
I think you still want it there so you can toggle between processes and do these things on the fly. I mean, to make it a lot smaller.
This would be like a scratch sort of image situation where you're like doing something really, really small and targeted. Like it would not be very flexible.
Would the multi-call things reference the launcher though? Or would they actually, I assume you don't want to actually like compile out the launcher per binary.
Just symlinks.
Right.
What's
You actually
the
still
current?
would need to ship the launcher.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was saying like you could in Optimize, I guess in like a super scratch thing, like if you decided to build one without launcher, it wouldn't be a default thing. Like you could spit out what launcher would normally do, like for a specific use case or something,
For direct false, it doesn't even source profile scripts. You could enable some mode on export that exports an image with no launcher and just sets the container environment correctly. Like that is totally possible and maybe something we should enable, but I feel like it's a little bit orthogonal to this.
Definitely.
What were you gonna say, Kenny?
I was gonna say, what's the current size of the launcher as it stands now? Do you know anyone?
Somewhere
Like a
around
ballpark?
3 megs. We did some re-architecting of the lifecycle code to make it smaller. It basically imports nothing at this point.
Barron's has a Rust branch. How big is that one, Barron's?
I think that was like 1.5 or something. For the
Gotcha.
muscle compilation, I think it's like without muscle, it's like under a meg. I don't know, it's been a while since I looked up the file size benchmark stuff.
Were we gonna talk about register build pack as well?
We talked about it before you came on.
I see.
Not very long because you weren't here.
Oh, so sad.
Yeah, I mean, it was mostly just a nudge to review the changes I made based on yesterday's feedback. I would like to get your thumbs up on it, Javier, since you put a bunch of work into it.
Okay.
But I think we're waiting for Steven and Terrence to vote, and then yeah. So I think I basically addressed everything in some form or another, and I added a future work section to capture published build pack and the other stuff that we talked about. I think we did want to talk about pull policy though too.
Yeah, we could talk about it in a holistic way. I know that there was a lot of contention yesterday about I guess what the default should be for image pulling. I know that there's kind of like a side conversation that Jesse is kind of bringing up the concern of like excluding the build pack images. I kind of want to motion to like have that conversation separately and like tackle that later, but keep it in mind more or less maybe for the syntax and options that would be available. But something I haven't updated the RFC for, but I was thinking about being maybe a good median for the concerns is something that's slightly different than what the, I guess, industry has, where instead of the default being if not present, there could be something, I think Joe kind of hinted at it, of if there was a way that we could ultimately have like a caching mechanism, right? And we already have a caching mechanism for build packs when we download them from a URI. So it's not completely crazy, but it's definitely different because my hope would have been to rely a lot on the caching mechanism that's already built into something like Docker, right? So like we say, hey, Docker, give me the latest version of this. It should be pretty fast about that, but it's obviously not, especially in cases for GCR. And I looked around and there are issues and reports of on Mac, the Docker daemon is particularly slow for GCR. All those issues were closed. So nobody really provided any insight into why. But nonetheless, what I've been bouncing around in my head is more or less something along the lines of periodic. So a pull policy of periodic, where we could, it'd be like periodic equals, and you could say something like 30 days, right? I think that was Joe's default proposal. And that way, we essentially have that caching mechanism where if we've already pulled this particular image within that time frame, we wouldn't try to retrieve it again unless it doesn't exist, right? So it's kind of adding additional functionality on the if not present option. And so it would ensure that everything stays up to date within that. We could define what it is. We could say like a week, right? But I think our biggest performance concerns was like back to back, right? Like if I just ran this command and then I run it again in 5 minutes, why the hell do I have to wait, to get this information back that is very certain hasn't changed?
Yeah, I was also thinking we could use the age of the image, but I like that, what you described a lot better.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we could use the age of the image, especially for Builder, because we removed that information specifically as part of the reproducibility information.
Right.
I guess my kind of pushback to some degree on not like the idea in general, but just like the infrequent updating is that I almost wonder, kind of like my comment that I made yesterday on the thing is like, if we had pack develop, would we be still making these same, like it seems like the use case is like, it's because I'm using pack build for development. And if you actually, like as an app developer, had a developed thing and that was catered towards development environment, would we actually still make these same kind of things? Like if people aren't actually running pack build constantly, like in your use case of like in the next 5 minutes, like would you actually want the same policies in place?
Yeah. What I agree, but what I like about the sort of like cache and expiring it is that if we get the pack develop, then we can pull back on that expire until it's 0, and that's not like, that doesn't create a significant change for the end user at all. Just pulling that default back. So, and I think it's very likely that you'd still want that cache or that expires value to be like an hour. I mean, this is actually, after talking to Emily about this yesterday, I'm like, man, this really is a significant performance hit, and I didn't realize how big it was. So even as the pack build case, when we have pack develop, I think I'd want a little buffer there.
What would it look
Yeah,
like
I mean,
for
I
a
guess
local
part of it is
builder?
just like it's the sub 0 kind of updates and things that you may not know you need or wanted that this definitely misses.
That's why I like that the policy is configurable, right? Like in my CI system, I would set full policy always. I think I'm okay with a default that doesn't let people go months without updating, but still doesn't add that performance hit to every build.
Yeah, I suggested 30 days, but I actually think that's too long.
Yeah, maybe even like a week or something. It's like, it's really bad when you're doing a bunch of things in a row. Even once a day wouldn't bother me nearly as much as every time.
Yeah, I mean, we can play around with it too, right? See what people say, see the feedback. But for sub-0, I mean, yeah, a day, that feels pretty reasonable. And like, if you're doing it if you really are that serious, you probably got a CI server that's doing it always. Although I worry about that being discoverable and people.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? They're always going to start fresh, though, aren't they? Like if you're doing it in CI, they're not going to start.
Not necessarily. depends on how your system's set up, right? If what registers you have access to. I guess part of it's just like I know Steven likes to keep saying you shouldn't use pack in the cloud or on a thing, but I think that is not true. And I guess some of my motivations are around like I think for better or worse, pack sets the gold standard of what people expect the cloud and build pack thing to do. And if pack build is for production and those are the default policies, like people are going to stand up stuff that again, like this may not be discoverable for people initially, right? Like, and what is kind of the window we want to have for setting people up for success there?
What is the window? But even on Heroku, we cache build packs for minutes, between our build system, the official build packs at least. I think it's like 10 minutes. And that is as production as it gets, right? Or even when we roll out stack images, it doesn't hit every node instantly. It takes time to roll it out. And I feel like that's the kind of thing we're talking about here, an optimization.
Yeah, I mean, my only reservation is that we're introducing something to, a pre-existing notion of a pull policy, right? And it's a very minor reservation, whereas this is a new concept that others wouldn't be essentially accustomed to. But that said, right, I think it gives us a lot of value. So I think it's worth kind of maybe breaking that convention a bit.
Doesn't Kate's has a pull policy?
The pull policy, yes, but there's typically only 3, right? It's like always, never, or if not present. It's never like, hey, if it's been longer than 30 days, or if it's been longer than this configurable period of time. So that's the new one that we're kind of trying to introduce.
Yeah, but Kate's, it isn't a fair analogy. Like nobody's running Kate's the way that people are running pack, right? It runs in a different place.
I like the idea. I think it's straightforward enough that I don't think it's too confusing to introduce as a new pull policy.
How might this work for us using pack as a library? Like, is this still gonna, like, where would we, where would this cache live, and how would it play with locally built builders? Would they be excluded from this, like me building a builder that exists remotely that I pulled yesterday? Is it suddenly going to dump my local builder when the 24 hours is up or whatever the pull policy is? Like, there are some interactions there that I'm curious on how we would solve.
It might look whether it exists to pull when the 24 hours is up. But if it doesn't exist, that doesn't fail anything. It would just keep using it. But
if it does exist, is it going to pull, is it going to wipe out my locally built version with the one, even though I guess without it being explicit, it's still going to pull it even though mine was built like an hour ago, right? There's no way for me to say, I built this builder, please. I guess if you create builder through pack, it could mark the cache right then as well.
I actually think that's the biggest drawback. Because people already get confused when they've built a builder locally and then pack pulls over it and it's not behaving the way they expect it to. I think that confusion would be amplified if for a long time it was behaving the way you expected it to, but then all of a sudden the next day it didn't.
Yeah, it's like, oh, where'd my builder go? I know I built this yesterday. Yeah.
Or like if it's a longer window, like 2 weeks, it stops working all of a sudden. So like you don't remember you built the builder.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we could have a policy of prefer local. That'd be interesting. Like prefer like locally built builders forever.
How do you know it was locally built? I guess you have to run the command.
It doesn't have a
digest. Mark it in
right?
like a hash table.
I don't know. Because it wouldn't have a digest, right? If it was on your local Docker data.
I also feel like I've built a builder with every name under the sun, including some of the real ones, and have forgotten that I did it. I wouldn't want it to be forever denoted that I take responsibility for this builder.
Yeah, I'll definitely add that as a drawback as I adjust this. It sounds like this is still much more preferable than changing the default, right? Or at least less controversial than changing the default to if not present. And then I guess my only other question is, like this RFC is essentially introducing two things, right? It's introducing the notion of this new flag if not present, as well as changing the default. And I know that the former part of this is not being debated, and we got a request for it recently from one of the Google projects. So I am curious if there would be any issues with starting to do the development on that side at least. Or maybe just updating this RFC to only be for changing a default. I guess I'm not sure what the best route to go there is.
Split it into two. Everyone can agree that we should have more poll policies, and we can approve that, and then we could fight about the default afterwards.
Do we want, I guess like part of it's just like, do you want Boolean flags or do you want like a single flag or both?
I feel strongly about the single flag. I feel like it's easier.
Yeah, it's the least flexible one though, right? When we think about, future-proofing it for potentially allowing additional parameters, such as a policy per image type almost.
I'm okay lumping all of that in that string, actually. Like,
Yeah, me too. I still use the Docker volume one instead of the mount.
Yeah. Equals if present, comma, always something,
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of the kind of line to walk is like, you also don't want to flood the CLI with like so many different flags because they happen to be different options on another flag, because you wanted to just have like kind of the single flags as well.
I thought we were saying we would not have more flags. We'd have fewer flags.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one we're agreeing to.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle.
Flags.
I guess I don't care.
Well, I mean, it like implementing if not present as a single flag, right? That is actually part of a general poll policy.
I think it's like -- poll policy is the flag, and a value it can take is if not present. If I'm understanding what we're agreeing to.
Yep, that's what I like as a poll policy flag with options. And then we can expand that later with types and stuff if we have to.
So we're not suggesting a just general if not present flag, right?
Yeah, the way I put it on the RFC is Boolean flags, right? That kind of toggle the state, or just one singular flag, which is at the primary proposal where it says image policy. It seems like I'm hearing more towards there being one single flag image policy that then could take in additional arguments or parameters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where I'm leaning, just because as we add more options, like I think the moment you start to add a single flag, you then have to continue to add a flag for every option, right?
Right. Cool. Yeah. Then I'll figure out how to break up this RFC into something that we could at least consume immediately and keep the discussion going about the default / periodic.
Sounds like there's enough agreement that you could even start
implementing
it, knowing that there's some risk it doesn't get approved, but the risk seems low.
Yep.
Yeah, worst case, we've introduced a policy that we can do as developers, and even if the default is still always pull, right?
Yeah, I mean, isn't the easiest path to just default the pull policy right now to what the current state is?
Yes. To always.
All right, we're at time and I need to bounce.
Cool.
Good.
Thank you all. See ya.
See you guys.